Hello and welcome to another episode of Mordred's Community Multiplayer, EU4 Political Chat, joined as always by my co-host, the Martian. Martian, how's it going?
It's going good.
So, fun little session from this past Saturday. We'll take a quick look, Great Power List. No AI left on the Great Power List. Surprising to you or expected?
I think it's kind of expected, but I think it says a lot about how much we've done this session. There's a lot of growth from a lot of people, and just already looking pretty solid.
And we've got Jadari, City Razors, Laurent, Bjarnik, Smallfellows, Vanille, Gowid, Catarata. Any surprises here?
I will say that I'm definitely surprised that Vanille is on there. Um, while the colonial possessions are already pretty good, it's surprising to see it at sixth. Very surprising.
Yeah, it looks like almost 900 development amongst your colonial nations. And then the one that surprised me, it kind of snuck up on me to be honest, Smallfellows, coming in number 5 on the list. Pretty good session
Yeah.
for them.
And I will say it's also very surprising that they're on the list and Castelier isn't on the list.
I
Because,
believe
on the map, they look very similar.
so.
Yeah, there's a difference.
Castellier is actually above in development. There's just the institution penalty at this time as players adopt colonialism, keeping them off the list.
Yeah.
So expect Catarata to move up the list with that, and expect Castellier to move back on once they accept. One other thing to note, Gowid slowly getting pushed off the list. Are you surprised, or was it expected given the fact that they started as AI and then had a little bit of a rough go of it?
I will say it's not super surprising. Gowid's been in a rough spot so far this MP, but I think they're in a really good position to turn it around. With Laurent in particular, once they don't have any more of the small countries, there's not as much reason for them to fight anymore, and it could really open them up to go to the southeast, at which point they're only fighting the Emperor. So it makes it to where that now, while they did take a step back, they have an easier path forward now.
Yeah, and let's dive in, touch base on some of the wars that occurred over in the Empire region. So the session started off relatively interesting conflicts. We had Westham and Gowid go in on Istralor. Istralor was, I believe, allied with Vern at the time, but Vern declined the call or maybe dropped the alliance shortly before. They were able to bring Catarata in on their side, so it was Westham and Gowid versus Istralor and Catarata. It looked like Westham and Gowid were going to win. We had a late intervention from Laurent against Gowid, or Gawade, or however you want to say it. And then Bjarnik also got involved against the Gnomish hierarchy. Net, Westham, Gowid lost. Um, Laurent got a little bit. They got eventually Madelaire released the Westham Vassalor PU. Istralor got, I believe, a few territories on Damestier Island, and then Catarata got a decent chunk of Vern's land, and then Gowid was forced to give up a few subjects here, but has slowly revassalized and reintegrated some of them, Elk March being the outstanding one. How is that war from your perspective?
I think there was a lot to unpack with this war. As far as Jarnik kind of picking a side, coming into this, going against the Gnomish hierarchy. Before this, they weren't super involved with the Diplo, but now with this series of wars, they've really kind of drawn a line as far as who they're going to be friends with and who they're not. I think even more impactful, though, is Vern breaking the alliance with Istralor. Going into the session, it was a really nice, strong power base for Istralor. And now that Vern has sided with Wisdom, there's going to be a lot more conflict a lot more quickly, which we immediately saw. And I think it's a very hard position for both Vern and Istralor, because it from here on out is a fight to the death between the two of them. And I think the players are probably going to try and delay it for a little bit now, kind of rebuild because it was very costly for both of them. But it really a great direction for our MP to go in. It's going to add a lot more entertainment down the line.
Yeah, I think it was the right move by West Ham and Gowid to try to disrupt Isterlor's grip on power within the Empire. I think Vern actually made the right call. They have a few conflicting claims. It did not work out for them, first of all. We'll put that out there. Vern as a country, not in awesome shape, but I do think it
Yeah.
was the right call. Allying with Wesdam gave them a chance to potentially take down Isterlor, and Vern would become the power broker on this side of the Empire, Wesdam on this, and then Gowid would get a little bit of expansion here. I think long term, Wesdam actually has come out of this relatively healthy. Decent eco, a few loans left, a little bit behind on tech, but still pretty strong. Isterlor took a beating. They're rebuilding slowly. I think when we look at the Empire and the strongest countries in it right now, the top three in my mind are Wesdam, Conwell, and Telgier, with Isterlor and Vern and Bolsolar being that second tier right now. What are your thoughts?
I think there's a really interesting kind of like effect of all of these wars, and the fact that all of these nations that participated are now a step behind everyone else. All these nations that got to sit back and relax this session are notably stronger now, and now you've seen the power gap shrink for a lot of these nations. You see with Castilier and Smallfellows, they've been able to have really great sessions, not having to do anything too intense, some AI wars, but now they look incredibly competitive with the nations to the west, and the same thing happened with Telgier and Conwell, right? They weren't in the war, and so it's a big step up for them. And I will say, for those two nations, if it wasn't for shooting themselves in the foot on multiple occasions with coalitions, I think they would be up there with Wisdom. But even then, they have the ability to still do that going from here on out, and they're in a really strong position. Um, as far as the nation that is kind of looking on the download here, I feel really bad for Vern in particular in the fact that they have to go colonial. And all these players around them that they're having to compete with aren't doing that. And it really hurts Vern from an ideas perspective and financial perspective having to try and have these colonies while still not being able to have their homeland safe. So they're in a really hard position because of that.
Yeah, it's interesting with the rules and the way we're trying to shape some of the gameplay. He did go double colonial, which may have been the wrong idea. He may have benefited from simply going exploration and quality or quantity or economic, but we'll see what comes of it. I did want to point out Conwell actually, I believe, highest income in the Empire. Um, Quite a bit of money in the Conwell coffers. So even though they did get coalition by the AI, they've come out of it pretty strong. And I also want to call attention to Laurent. Diplomatically, Laurent still doesn't look entirely huge, but when you take into account their vassal swarm, um, they've almost they have an ironclad grip on this area. The only thing that's going to stop them is a resurgent Gowid, or maybe Bjarnik or some elves coming back from the New World, but incredibly valuable land here, farmlands and grasslands throughout, incredibly high income. Expect Laurent to be able to be a true kingmaker, given the steps back that Gowid took. It's going to be interesting to see if Laurent, Mordred has kept himself out of the Empire up until this point. He does have some missions to go that way should he choose to exercise them. It's going to be interesting to see what Mordred does this session. Do you have any thoughts on where Laurent may end up?
I think Laurent, I mean, obviously, in many ways, they're uncontested at the moment. Obviously, if you have Gowid and Bjarnik working together in separate wars, that can kind of combat Laurent, but even then, there's an obvious disadvantage to having that in separate wars, which is the only way any players could easily contest Laurent. And when you just look at raw army size, I mean, it's exceptionally dominant over the other players in the region, even before you get to the vassals, like, seeing the Red Glades with over 20,000 troops. that's bigger than some of these nations' standing armies. And so it's in a very, very dominant position where they can do what they want. And I see them helping out the Gnomish hierarchy in particular a lot here, as I don't think Mordred's necessarily looking to expand his reach a whole lot here. And I think he's wanting to play a more of a diplomatic game.
Yeah, he's getting close to his governing capacity. I believe he still has, yeah, plenty of room for agendas, so that's actually not too much of a limiting factor for him. It's going to be interesting to see what Laurent does this Saturday.
Yeah.
Let's shift to the impending war. There have been some words bandied about on Discord this week. We have an interesting choice by the Wood Elves. I'm not sure I agree with it. I'm not going to get into nation management in this video, but rather than expand to the west, the Wood Elves broke into the Serpent Spine. So we now have several provinces, including a dwarven road, controlled by the Wood Elves. They've aligned themselves with their, I don't know, pink dwarves to the south, and the green, blue, and gold dwarves are not too happy about this. Any thoughts about the impending battles to come here?
I think it's an interesting situation. I think it's one that Mindboy, the Elven player, hasn't exactly gotten the credit due for it. Because while it is a very risky play and a very ballsy move, and I'm not sure he has the firepower to back it up, if he can win these wars, there's so much to gain from it. By being able to be the dominant voice in the Serpent Spine, you gain so much power in this MP. And especially since he did find a dwarven ally, he can if he wins this, he can try and take some hold provinces for his ally, make his ally bigger, or take some provinces for himself. But most importantly, if he wins this, he can make it to where he doesn't really get invaded from the east. With a kind of weak Harpyland player to the east, the only real threat for him was Ernatdir. And so if he does actually manage to win this, it would be huge for him and a very, very good move. It's just he has to win the war to survive.
Yeah, and I think a lot's going to hinge on who is the attacker and who's the defender. Obviously, Serpent Spine is a unique terrain type that most people in vanilla aren't used to playing with. There's not a lot of maneuvering to be done, so I think it typically is going to be advantageous towards the defender. So we'll see if how hard they're able to push on Mindboy to kick him out. Um, as we rotate, let's go to the south a little bit. We've got Catarata, we've got the Jadari, we've got Harpyland, and we've got, I don't even want to say this, Aquitbar Overclan. Jadari, obviously, dominant force in the region, number one great power right now, approaching governing cap, even with their estate policies, a few of them enacted, so not a ton of expansion left, but is there anything that can be done to slow down or stop the Jadari in this phase of the game? Obviously, as the map consolidates, there's fewer AIs, there's opportunities, but do these three have a chance?
I think these have a chance in the realm that Jadari is willing to work with people diplomatically, and as you said, Jadari is reaching their gov cap. It's one of those things that no one could stop Jadari, but also Jadari can't really go much further than what they already have. I mean, Jadari's already punching, it really doing so much stuff at once right now, and for Jadari, it's better to just kind of sit and chill right now. Even though the other players will get stronger, Jadari's played well diplomatically, working with Verkal Gulan, and it's been generally, friendly on the terms that you see the light. But generally speaking, they don't really need to push into these other players. And I think Kedarata in particular tried to take advantage of that this session by helping out Istralor. And I think that was a very good move on their part. They they were punished later down the line against a coalition, but I think this region is a lot safer than it might seem for those other players.
Yeah, it should be an interesting one to see. Looking back on it, the lack of developed nations or map or content in Africa and the rest of Asia puts Jadari in a really odd spot. They have no real threat from the east, so they can just push west almost unopposed. And the nations in the west, obviously Harpyland wasn't here this past week. Overclan was not here the first week. I think had those two players been there from the get, we'd be looking at a much different map. But yeah, at this point, it's going to be tough to stop Jadari in the current political climate. But if someone is able to, and maybe our good friends, the Centaurs to the north, City Razor continues to expand, continues to grow. Um, Force limit over 100 at this point. Uh, Manpower approaching 200,000. Healthy economy, number 2 great power, and has now officially bordered a player. What's next for our hooved friends in the north?
I think City Razor has an exceptionally fun game ahead of them. Obviously, there's still some consolidation to do with the like Lake Victorian nations, just getting that eaten up. But really, they have so many options here. They can try and go into the Serpent Spine right now against Durham Blue Shield, and the current war with Mindboy looming presents a great opportunity to do so. They could go west to Bajarnik quite easily, or they could go south to Verkal Gulan and try and nab the 45 income province. So there's so many great expansion opportunities for them, and not to mention that they have the troops to back it up. And so they're in a really fun position right now, I think, even more so than Jadari, because they're not even bound by the Diplo that they've made so far, because realistically they can kill whoever they want.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Honestly, I'd never played the Centaurs, didn't know quite what to expect, but I'm impressed. Lone Without a consolidated the general Centaur tribes quite a bit the first session, but in the second session he grew faster than I expected and is ready to leave the Forbidden Plains earlier than I anticipated. So it's going to be interesting which route he chooses. Obviously, we have the northern, we have the central. There's a path into the Serpent Spine this way, and then obviously into the Jadari through the south. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. And as we rotate to the north and the west, a few possible targets for the City Razors: Bjarnik, Castelier, Gowid, Smallfellows. Do you anticipate a large amount of conflict over this area? The Hellenic Reach, the Grudian Coast, West and Inner Castanor in the sessions to come?
As far as Castanor goes, I don't see there being a lot of conflict because I think all the players that might go into there are going to be far too distracted to go in there. But I do think Bjarnik has, there's as much conflict as City Razor wants, and City Razor has no reason not to conflict there. And so I think that region will probably stay contested for a long time just because it's such a natural expansion path for the City Razors, and because of weakness from those wars, you might see Castelier also want to push into that region. So there's a lot of potential threats for Bjarnik right now, and not a lot of room to do Diplo as well.
And before we shift to the New World, obviously one thing we're encouraging this season, a little more role playing, a little more fluidity from a relations perspective as you approach it from your ruler's perspective. Your ruler may not be the same ruler as it was 100 years previously, etc. I think Vern showed us an example of some fluidity with moving away from the Istrolor alliance. Obviously, they did not join on West Dam's side, but they did leave Istrolor hanging a little bit there. If you take a look at the map as a whole, do you expect, or I'll frame it in a different way, where would you expect some more fluidity? Any potential alliances that we've seen early game that may deteriorate late game in your mind?
I think the most obvious is the Dwarven nation and the nations in the Serpent Spine. Obviously, there's a lot of incentive for them to expand into each other with how great the holds are. And for each one of them, they have a great uniqueness to them that makes it easier to take over the other, right? Airnetvir has a good military already. Verkal Gulan has a great economy already. And they all have so many reasons to expand to each other that I think we'll see conflict brew there as soon as the elves are out of the Serpent Spine. But also, I think Castellir and Smallfellows could potentially see some conflict later on as well, just because it's convenient and easy for both of them. So,
Definitely convenient. Was interesting. Smallfellows broke out of, we'll call it, I believe it's, yeah, South Castanor into, I don't even know what this is. South Eskin, whatever. So they chose not to push too hard towards the north, have gone south. Mindboy going into the mountains leaves open this area. And then we had no Arnon player, so that expansion was presented. I think that relieved a lot of tension between these two, but I think you're right. I think the dwarves probably present the best opportunity for diplomatic fluidity, we'll call it, given their mission trees. And then outside that, I'd like to see the Empire continue to plot and scheme and maybe have some shifting alliances over the course of the next 100, 200, 300 years.
I will say, as of now, the only alliance I think is likely to last the entire game would be the Laurent Gnomish Hierarchy Alliance. But other than that, I think lots of these, relations are very fluid. So,
Yeah, there's very little conflict between those two trees. It probably does make sense for them to remain allied. Um, yeah.
well, the Gnomish Hierarchy tree actually does have claims over the large majority of Laurent.
Oh, really?
Um, mhm.
Okay.
So they actually have quite good reason to go after them. It's once you go further down here, obviously, um, there's a whole line of this
Oh,
mission
wow,
tree
yeah.
that's all about
Yep.
going after various chunks of Laurent's land.
Oh, yeah. Jesus.
Yeah.
Wow, this is a... Yeah.
It's actually it's a very large conflict between the two trees, even more so than like Istralor and Varen, which we just discussed earlier. But,
Yep. Okay. Interesting.
But just knowing the players there, I would doubt that the hierarchy would try and capitalize on that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It does look like he is working through those missions, but obviously Riveria being AI would be the next one, so we'll see what happens there. Let's shift a moment, touch on the new world. Obviously, we have yourself, the 800-pound gorilla in the new world. We have a few other colonies, one falling under Laurent, one falling under Vern. We have Bjarnik starting in the north, and then we also have Keterata starting to move in the south. From a colonial perspective, outside the elves, obviously, who's got the strongest position right now?
I mean, right now nothing looks particularly impressive. I mean, as far as Laurent's colonies go, obviously their AI subjects have colonized a lot more than the player themselves. And I mean, fairly so, with Laurent being more, mainland focused, and Keterata also is still a good ways away from actually having a colony, as well as Vern not actually making a colony in the Leechdens, which surprised me a lot to say the least. It's just been generally weak from all the players, and I don't think there's a particular advantage to any of them. I think if any of those players just spent a session focusing on getting a colonial region, they could be far ahead of the other players.
And looks like you're relatively close, I believe 3 years away from being able to touch the button. Obviously, there's quite a big impact once you do. Once you press the button, you'll shift to the new world. Players be aware that your war declarations will not be directly upon a player. They'll have to use the enforced peace mechanics. But how quickly are you going to pivot from being a colonizer to being a consolidator of the new world?
I'm not planning on being particularly aggressive about it, and I have tried to be diplomatic with players. For example, the Bjarnik player talked, and I'm going to avoid the northern region, and he'll be able to colonize there. And I'm not trying to be super aggressive about it, but at the same time, there are certainly regions I want and that I'm going to consolidate. The Blood Groves being a great example of that. Um, but I'm really not trying to be super aggressive and like get every province in the New World by any means.
Saturday, a couple days away. What are you looking forward to most?
Well, I am hoping to press the button this next coming Saturday, so that would be fun. But I think that you'd be remiss not to try and watch the Dwarven Elven War for the Serpent Spine. I think it's going to be super good. It's going to decide that region for the rest of the game. So
I agree. I can't wait. We did have a great set of wars over in the Empire. I thought it was dynamic, chaotic, um,
lots of fun.
relatively balanced, fun to watch. But this is going to be the first war of a multiplayer for us in the Serpent Spine with an elven military versus a dwarven military. I think there's going to be some really cool dynamics at play. I can't wait for this one.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to watch. Well, I can't watch it, but it'll be exciting to listen to.
Yep. Any final thoughts?
No, I think we're in for yet another great session. I think our alliance rules, while weird, have already paid dividends because we've gone to see some great wars in just session 2, and we're about to see more in session 3. And it's going to be lots of fun once again.
Well, appreciate the time. Thank you.